We will have no other king but King Jesus. And in signing this document, we said we would have no other king but King Jesus. We were done with divine right kings, and what we have today, as Representative Sorg was alluding to, is the return of divine right kings and their star chambers and their judges, which, if you read this document, you'll find only one mention about money, but you will find several mentions about bad judges not being answerable to anybody but the king. So we want to make mention of that, that the things that America is are not accidental. Also don't want to miss an opportunity to give thanks to somebody who's with us tonight that has certainly put in many, many hard years of work, and that's Diane Gilbert Spidel. If she'd stand. Has expended quite a bit of time. Now, I always get it wrong. I'm sorry. I come from another generation. Maybe I come from another planet. I don't know. She is the chairwoman. Isn't that how you just said it over there?
Chairman.
Chairman, who's, well, anyway, you know what we mean. And she has started this organization. Many of you out there have helped along the way over the years. And I just would appreciate along the way that you would remember her, pray for her, commend her. She's put a lot into this, and we'll give you a second round of applause. Very much. Our next speaker is Representative Ingbretson, Paul Ingbretson. He's an artist. He really is. You ought to see him in that committee for the redress of grievances. I've had the great opportunity of testifying there, and he is very much an artist. He's masterful at it. I like that. He's first elected to the House in 2002. During his tenure, he has championed the constitutionally protected principles of life, liberty, and property. In the 2009-2010 term, he chaired the ad hoc caucus on redress of grievances, serving to demonstrate the need to revive the 18th century process, known to many people as an ancient right, in a sense, to further develop it for meeting the felt necessities of the times. To borrow a statement from one liberal Supreme Court justice, to expose what the liberal big government agenda has done to short circuit our founding fathers' plan for a limited, checked, and balanced government. Representative Ingbretson now chairs such a committee on redress. So please welcome with me, Paul Ingbretson.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know how many people here actually realize what's going on over here. You're talking about Madison, Jefferson, and, well, John Adams. I mean, you're talking about something historic over here, both the knowledge base and the willingness to work to produce the change that those guys did, and I'm really excited. I think of these guys as the fighting dog, and I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing up here. I figured out I'm the tail. The dog needs a tail, and maybe the tail actually is the tail of redress, which is quite a tale of itself. Yet I'm an artist by trade, and we, if we're still in our right minds as artists, are primarily interested in beauty. Anybody familiar with that term? It's sort of been lost in the modern era of self-expression and a few other things, and injured to some degree, but I am a fan of a gentleman named Schiller who talks about aesthetics back in, I want to tell you, the 1600s, aesthetics in education. And aesthetics, to him, was doing things beautifully, including the operation of government. And when you're talking about representative government, you're talking about, well, what are we unifying around? I mean, aesthetics, the key word in beauty is unity. It's taking all these, the e pluribus unum, it's taking all this multiplicity of stuff and making a unity out of it. But we unify around the liberties of individuals. And so probably the most beautiful thing in the New Hampshire Constitution, which I'm about to read to you, are Articles 31 and 32. That's the redress of grievances. We get to govern ourselves, and then we have to listen when we do it, when we screw it up and hurt ourselves. And this is a most remarkable thing, and I'm always impressed. You may have seen recently the fun we've been having with the Attorney General's office. They just don't seem to get it. They thought they were the government. And it's always a remarkable thing to me. Now, the courts think they're the government, but the AG really knows it's the government. And so we've been having fun, and if you've looked, and you ought to look at the recent report from my committee, and by the way, written by the distinguished learned hand, my right hand when it comes to any kind of writing that has anything useful in it by way of the committee. I steal Representative Sorg. Excuse me. I've lost my track here. Where was I?
You were stealing it.
I was stealing. You need to read, thank you. Yeah. You need to read the calendar from just a couple of weeks ago, not last week's calendar, but the one before, and read what we said to the Attorney General's office, who had just finished abusing to the tune of $250,000 one of our citizens, putting him at risk of 8 years in jail in a lawless act. In an act that two courts, I believe, and then finally the Supreme Court agreed was a lawless act. One of the, at the level of the Superior Court, they told the AG's office to settle with this gentleman. And in the process, of course, of getting through that, they came to the Redress of Grievances Committee. And of course, as I said, the conclusion that we came to, I think, makes for very bold reading and very exciting reading. It's a sign of a very significant sea change. Government of the people is not beautiful unless it is in fact recognized to be of the people. I'm one of those individuals who keeps thinking, when I'm not thinking, that government is them up there, and I usually mean somebody like the courts or the governor's office in the agencies, and I'm afraid of them. I'm frankly I'm surprised sometimes at how fearful I am of them. And it's wrong. I mean, it just goes counter to everything we've ever heard of in relation to American government. So let me read you the redress articles, and then let me get on to some detail that's what I'm really here for. I think I got 21 minutes altogether, and I've probably used up half of it already. And whether in this order, I'm not exactly sure. But Article 31 says, "The legislature shall assemble for the redress of public grievances and for making such laws as the public good may require." Redress means fix. And public grievances or wrongdoings done to them, right? Article 32, Article 32, the people have a right in an orderly and peaceable manner to assemble and consult upon the common good, give instructions to the representatives, and to request of the legislative body by way of petition or remonstrance, redress of the wrongs done them and of the grievances they suffer. This is the most beautiful stuff. Dan's right, there's nothing like this. I don't think any act of government is doing this. And I was talking to a gentleman from Baltimore, representative I met in Colorado recently. And I said, so you know it's in there, right? You know it's in your Constitution, the right to redress. And he just looked at me blankly. Yeah, he didn't know it was in there. Didn't even make an offer, by the way, to look into it either, which is to me sort of a sad state. So, but what we found, and this is the beginning of the history. Any number of people, partly because Representative Itse made himself a target, any number of people began to approach him and say, how can we fix this? This is wrong. I'm being injured by the courts. I haven't seen my daughter in 2 years. I've never done anything wrong. And it goes on like that. And before you know it, he must have had a half a dozen, maybe a dozen different individuals who would come to him and say, how do we fix this? This is out of control. We're talking primarily about the family courts. To some degree, he's talking about DCYF. We have before us 25 bills, and half of them, fully half of them are from those two. The largest group is from the family courts, and half again that many are from DCYF. The ones from the family courts include the guardians ad litem. Now we recently. When we found out that DCYF through the Attorney General's office, was going to refuse to come in and talk to us when we were hearing some of these things. And by the way, I want to say Stella Trombley is a member of my committee. She's in fact the clerk of my committee, and we're the most dedicated enemies of arbitrary government and abuse of our people, and I really appreciate that you're here. But they, the Attorney General's office is fighting back and telling us no, 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 and then they put out this big statement, a 6-page document they sent to all the newspapers. The newspapers dutifully reported this junk. And I say junk because frankly it was sensationalized and they were wrong. But so we did our own, through another very enthusiastic, and I would say sometimes over the top. I feel like he's this hot air balloon sometimes. One of my reps, Representative Avar, who I love. But I feel like I gotta want to string it. I have to keep pulling him back down to earth again and hold him down and tie him to something. But he's the guy whose idea was we had to get back and create a response and have a press conference. And he set it up, organized it, and all that sort of stuff. And it was extremely effective. And it was a chance for us to state the nature of things in terms of redress of grievances, and how necessary it was for us to remember that the people is the right place. We the people are the government. We're the right place for redress, not just in the courts themselves. The courts are useful and important. However, so what we found is the AG wouldn't let people come over, and so we went and looked for subpoena power, and we received subpoena power, I think by 1 vote or something. It was a very close margin. We had to have 2/3 to change the rules, but we got a form of subpoena power that'll work for us. And immediately, within a matter of weeks, the Supreme Court made a decision that GALs are immune from prosecution. Not that we were going to be prosecuting, we just wanted to probably have a few of them come in and talk to us about what the heck they were doing. And there were some very serious things. Among other things, you'll hear things like a GAL will stand before a court and move the court. It's lawless. They don't have the right to move the court. And so here they are suddenly, through the Supreme Court, they're getting immunity. They're treated like they're somehow special citizens. And again, I would say, if I read this right, and that's the way I read it, that's what they've done. They already believe that themselves are immune. And in one sense they are, in relation to their acts, but I'm not the theoretical authority and have nothing in the background of these guys. As I said, I'm the tail of the dog. So what happened was, under the Democrats, we went and looked for redress of grievances. We went and found there was no process. There was no way to bring a petition into the House. So I should say we, Representative Itse and I, but it's always on the first line. Prime sponsor was looking for the bill that would create a process. And it was rejected by a Democrat House. And so we decided to go ahead and bring petitions in anyway. And we brought them in successfully eventually through a difficult struggle, at which point the Speaker of the House, Representative Norelli, decided to put them in a file, as if she had no obligation to listen or to do redress. Right here, in the Constitution, we have the obligation to redress grievances. And so it went into what may as well have been a circular file, went literally into a metal file cabinet, and was never seen again. She told her committee members that they could not take these petitions out of that file cabinet and call the people and then have a listen for the purposes of redressing. She explicitly told them they couldn't do it. And we know of a representative who wanted to do it, and I think subsequently lost her favor and eventually was out of that committee. She'd been in and all sorts of things, having been a chairman of the committee, because she went sort of public trying to get to help people who she saw had been injured, even though in sort of over the head of the Speaker. So there's a very interesting story here, but there's a built-in sense, and I think it's primarily with the other party, but it's not exclusively the party, that there's this thing called government, and it's got this quasi-divine quality. So it's like a replacement for God, and we mustn't be messing with God. So who are we, the people? Who do we think we are? Authorities have said something or other, and who are we? And it's a big surprise, but it's a beautiful thing that we, in fact, are the people. We are the government, as Representative Itse said. So what are we finding, to get specific? I must have a couple minutes left. But we're primarily wanting to talk today about the family courts. If I didn't skip something I was going to say, I tried to keep somewhat orderly here. The family courts is where most of the problems appear to be, and to some significant degree, some of the problems that DCYF, that people are experiencing through DCYF, are also involved in the family courts. But what we're finding on a fairly consistent basis in the family courts is a fairly common pattern. Serious failures of due process. An example of which what might be that you came in for a hearing, and then all of a sudden the hearing you came in for had been changed to a different hearing, which you had not been notified about, and you're now, all your custody is now subject to complete change, with witnesses you never knew existed, you had no chance to depose. Things like this are going on a routine basis. In the ones we're hearing, and there are 9 before us right now. Now, Representative Itse and I kept out like 10 of them because they're all surrounding one marital master. A marital master named Marital Master Cross. At that time, I believe it was in Derry. And we purposely asked those people not to come in because most of them were asking for impeachment of this gentleman. We unsuccessfully tried to impeach him, we tried to address him, and we're now knocking on the door of the head of the family courts because he could just remove him with a stroke of the pen, as it turns out. He could just fire this guy and won't do it. We don't even see any evidence that despite all that we've shown and the seriousness of our efforts in the House, we haven't even seen he's made any special effort to investigate the guy. So what we see effectively after one hearing, I was looking, by the way, it's 2 different things. In one case, I was sitting there, one representative who's in the room here sitting there was briefly said to me afterward, at some point, maybe he said it from sitting in the chair, he said, "I see no fewer than 6 or 7 red flags." Here's a person with a little bit of background and understood what he was seeing. This person describing these things one after another that he's seeing. Red flags, in our mind then, had to do with things that were inexplicable failures of due process, for example, and what looked like lawless or arbitrary governing. I remember at the end of one hearing, my comment to the person who was reporting to us was, "So did this feel maybe a little bit random, a little arbitrary? I mean, could you find a reason for what they were doing?" And he said, "No, those are the words." He said, "You're describing what happened. We couldn't find reasons for what they were doing." And the very definition of tyranny is arbitrary government. Random government is tyranny, and there's no mistaking it. And if you can't remove your judges, or if it's almost impossible because the guts aren't there in your house, it really begins to be a big issue. We do know we have the power to change this court. We've made it, we can get rid of it and the rest of that stuff. The marital masters apparently are on their way out for good reason. But yeah, we hope so. We actually had an agreement, and we found that 2 of them had been rehired after the Speaker had made an agreement with the court for the restructuring of the courts that would include the marital masters not being rehired. They rehired 2 of them subsequently, which brought in a whole new conversation. And, by the way, I want to say this, it would be really remiss if I didn't mention Representative and the Speaker of the House, William O'Brien. You can tell you're doing something right when so many people hate you from the other side, from the wrong side of the fence. But Speaker O'Brien created this, having himself sat in some of our caucus meetings and listened. He didn't do this out of whole cloth. He didn't create the Redress of Grievances Committee because we persuaded him to. And I certainly didn't volunteer to be the chair of a committee that I have no time to do properly. Although I would rather be here, I would have probably been out of the House this year if it weren't for this committee. And so thanks a lot, Dana. I appreciate that. No, but the patient operation of passing laws and failing at, for example, trying to get rid of the Bar Association, Mirski's been the most important influence in the sense that he told me early on, if you're going to change anything, it's going to take us a whole bunch of years. And one of my one of my constituents at home reminded me last year, he said, "You told me it was going to take 10 years, and here it is." And he's talking about the change that you're seeing in front of you right now. that 5 seconds or 5 minutes or 1 minute?
5 minutes.
Oh, it's okay. Believe it or not, I don't have a lot more to say. Oh, I can say a lot more. I had a lot of fun recently at MIT. I had this wonderful opportunity to meet with physicists and in an arts and physics exchange, just a little salon. And I'm not bragging because I don't have any degrees, guys. But it was a wonderful exchange. But the person who introduced me said, and now I'm going to introduce one of the most unusual things you'll ever see. A painter who can actually talk about painting. It is pretty unusual. I wish I could speak as well about government as I can about painting. What we found in this world of the arbitrary was they have and I understand this is in law, sort of in general, and Representative Sorg could probably fill us in. By the way, I want to say I really enjoyed those speeches. You guys, just wonderful to be here tonight. I hope nobody gets offended by the tail of the dog, but anyway. So, what we found is that there's this thing in this set of rules that we have so much time and so much difficulty in managing this set of rules that these guys have in the courts. But they have one that we found quite offensive, and it's all I can tell you. It's Rule 1.2. 1.2 is a phenomenal little rule. And you know what, you can see in the case of judges how you might have to have a Rule 1.2. But Rule 1.2 in the family courts is that all rules may be wavered. And that wouldn't be so bad. And the provision in that, as I read it, is, but you'll have to give an explanation. Okay? Well, they don't. They will frequently waive rules and waive again, and they'll fail in due process, and they'll never explain, and they'll never explain. What we're actually seeing people do, and I'm telling you, an army is starting to grow out there, and it's most dangerous. It's not just unfortunate, but it's dangerous. Thomas Ball, as some of you may have heard of, Thomas Ball out in Keene, had spent years and years in this morass called the family courts. And finally, was it a year and a half, 2 years ago, he stood himself in the doorway of the court, of the district court in Keene, and he poured gas over himself and lit himself. I'm telling you, this is serious stuff. This doesn't happen when there's a random wrong here or there. This is a symptom. It's a symptom of rage. And in my view, our courts are responsible for creating a rage which can only be created, in my view, by fundamental unfairness. You don't get there by getting a ruling against you. People keep telling us, oh, these are family court decisions, you know, the spouses always hate each other and all this sort of stuff. Randomness makes you angry. People can have decisions against them, but randomness ain't okay. It's the opposite of fairness, it's the opposite of justice. What is the picture you see? You see balance. And you see the weighing of the left and the right, and you see that if you have an opportunity to bring witnesses against you, the other side has an opportunity to bring witnesses in their favor. We have documents. They're sealed from the person accused, but he's lost the right to see his kid with sealed documents in our family courts. I mean, I'm laughing, but it's not funny. I mean, this is bizarre behavior. And it's random. I mean, now, I'm going to tell you this. There's 27 family courts. And I was talking to one of the persons who brought in the family courts, Representative Weiler. He brought in, he was one of the sponsors of one of the bills that I guess was key to making this happen. I want to say it was in 2002 or something like that. And he said, we had done a study. One of us was in Grafton and one of us in Rochester. And he said, the Rochester study, man, people were just in love with it. That was the greatest thing. Things were happening fast. There weren't big fights. He said, I was so surprised when we got to the testimony, because Grafton came in and nobody liked the family courts. So his conclusion was, well, I guess it just depends on who the justice is. Isn't that dangerous law? I mean, this is what the founders warned us against. I'm going to just take us back and I'll stop with this. It is about beauty. Justice is one of the most beautiful things. Justice, mercy. Be sure when people do wrong, there's a justice. I stood in front of a lawyer in a court where things were clearly going wrong. And the side that was winning was the side with the most money. And we've seen this almost routinely. When you run out of funds, you run out of luck. We see systematic abuse. But I said to this lawyer, I said, so, if I'm not mistaken, it looks like the guy with the most money wins. And he said, what's wrong with that? Well, there's other things though. If it's arbitrary, and what's happening in these courts under these rules, or failure of rules, is like that, then the person with sex to give wins, right? The person with a connection wins, right? Several of these individuals who come before our committee have said, it started out fine, then the judge did something that made no sense to me and I questioned him. And he said, you know what happened after that? There was nothing fine again in that court for me. This can't be happening, folks. So I want to just remind us of that little concept, that thing called beauty. As an artist, you really appreciate it. You know you must be there. It's the way things actually ought to work. And I'll just remind you of the self-evident. That's what's so beautiful about our founding era and the founding thing. Self-evident. Let's keep justice. Let's keep the courts under control. It's self-evidently the people who own this place. Let's keep it that way and make it more so if we can. Thanks very much.
GrokTV.